Hello viewers and welcome back to the Dukascopy TV studio. I'm Ben Jones and joining us for a two-part interview is John Hancock from the International University in Geneva. John, thank you very much for coming in again.
Great to be here.
Now, could you talk a bit about some of the US data that's coming out as we begin this new year? Is it as positive as you were expecting?
Well, I think, we're getting a steady stream of relatively or absolutely positive data. I mean, this morning the latest trade numbers came out in the US, and it turns out the trade deficit is significantly lower than forecasts had expected. As a matter of fact, it's hit a 4-year low. A week before that, we had the factory orders data that showed that factory orders are significantly up. Before Christmas, we had the labor data, which showed that unemployment is going down, jobless rate is declining. So all of the numbers seem to point in a positive direction. Now, I think the first thing to caution against is relying too much on the numbers. I mean, these numbers come out, and then almost as soon as they're out, they're revised, and they're often revised quite dramatically. I mean, 2008, it's worth recalling, fourth quarter GDP growth in 2008 was initially registered at 3.8% drop. And we now have the revised data, and it was an 8.3% drop. And the difference between 3.8 and 8.3 is pretty dramatic. So I don't think we should rely too much on the numbers. It's more important to look at the underlying structural trends, and these are all good. Housing market is recovering. Trade is recovering. The ability to borrow, the lending requirements are loosening. The congressional craziness we saw last year seems, at least momentarily, to be subsiding, maybe because it's an election year. All that pent-up demand in the economy is starting to come to the surface, not the least for infrastructure and capital investments. So at an underlying level, the trends look very good. And maybe our biggest problem is a mental one right now. I mean, 6-7 years ago, there was irrational optimism unleashed on the world. I mean, the Pollyannish projections were so prevalent and so widespread that everyone seemed to ignore the quite obvious signs of bad news coming. Now we seem to be in the opposite world, a world of irrational pessimism. We're so downbeat and so gloomy about what's happening that we almost willfully ignore all the good signs. So I think it's good.
Okay, and we have Janet Yellen as now is the official chair of the Federal Reserve, but I'd like to talk about Ben Bernanke if we could. How do you think his time in charge will be remembered? Do you think he'll be remembered as a saviour of the American economy or perhaps a saboteur?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think you're right. We've just begun this sort of assessment or historical assessment of Ben Bernanke's tenure at the Fed and his longer career as an academic, and how he's contributed to or not contributed to the recovery. A lot of this will depend on your attitude towards monetary policy in general and the role of the Fed. I mean, those who are pro-Fed and pro-activist monetary policy see Ben as a savior. And of course, there's an equally significant constituent in the United States that say the Fed has been a disaster. It's added to the agony. He's made the problem worse. We should question the whole role of the Federal Reserve System, and especially its Fed chairman. I think some of this debate focuses perhaps a little too much, at least in the near term, a little too much on the science or the theory behind monetary policy, and less on the psychology of monetary policy. I mean, let's cast our mind back to 2007, 2008. I mean, Ben Bernanke inherited an economic system that was poised, if not engaged in, a full-scale panic. We had a classic problem of mass psychology, where the bad news kept accumulating, the signs of panic were accumulating, the temperature was rising. And if you contrast quiet, subdued, steady Ben Bernanke with, say, Hank Paulson, who looked sweaty and panicky and every day a new announcement and a policy U-turn, Ben Bernanke didn't do that. And the fact he didn't do that, I think, obscures the very delicate balancing act he had to perform. I mean, on the one hand, he had to act decisively. radically, people would say, and in many ways he's been the most radical Fed chair since the institution was created 100 years ago. I mean, he really acted in a very radical way. But at the same time, of course, this radicalism had to be seen as measured and steady and the appropriate response. You know, it was a very fine line between acting radically and throwing gasoline on the fire and adding to the sense of panic. My God, what's the Fed doing? I mean, it must be really much worse than we thought. And in a way, I think Ben Bernanke handled that brilliantly. And to the extent that we didn't descend into mass panic, that gradually the sense of normalcy returned, that we knew we were in the midst of a great recession or a massive downturn, but the run on the banks, the rapid unraveling of the financial system never happened. And a lot of that credit goes to Ben Bernanke.
Okay, so with Janet Yellen, what do you think her main goals are going to be for 2014? And is everything going to remain focused on tapering again?
Well, you know, in a way, I think his success has made her job a little bit easier. I mean, remember, we spent the last 6 months worrying about the end of tapering, right? There was going to be a big panic. The whole thing was going to collapse as soon as the spigot was turned off. Now they've announced their long-term policy goal, which is to gradually eliminate tapering, and we haven't seen a panic. As a matter of fact, we've seen positive signs in the U.S. economy, and it's taken as a sign, as it should be, of returning confidence about the underlying fundamentals of the U.S. economy. So her task is going to be rather different. His was, you know, fireman in chief and avoiding a complete meltdown and panic in the U.S. economy. Her job is going to be ensuring that this apparent road to recovery, not just for the U.S. but globally, is sustained and is not put off track. And we have to bear in mind that her job isn't just American. Her job is in some sense a global job. So one of the challenges she'll face is how to balance what is good for the U.S. economy versus what is good for the global system as a whole. And I think the signal that she's sending and that the Fed is sending is that both those objectives are best served by gradually taking the foot off the accelerator.
Okay, John, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, viewers, for watching. John will be with us for part 2 of his interview next week, so make sure you click back. But for now, goodbye.